A black waitress is fired and humiliated for feeding an old, hungry veteran with her own tips. Thought her act of kindness had cost her everything. In front of customers and coworkers, her compassion was condemned by a heartless manager obsessed with rules. Moments after her public dismissal, four Marines walked into the cafe, and what happened next turned a quiet act of compassion into a statewide reckoning. Whispers turned into headlines, and the town would never be the same. Behind the clatter of dishes and diner rules, one woman's dignity would light a fire that challenged authority, restored honor, and proved that silence is never stronger than standing up. The steam from a fresh pot of coffee fogged the cracked window of Bayfield Diner. Behind the counter, Keisha Hartley moved with quiet precision. At 30 years old, she'd mastered the rhythm of this life. Coffee poured with one hand, plates balanced in the other, always 2 steps ahead of the next table, needing ketchup or extra napkins. Her smile was easy but tired, the kind that said, "I've been doing this a long time." Keisha wasn't just a waitress. She was a mother first. Her 8-year-old son, Jordan, was her world. Every shift was a delicate balancing act. Double shifts to keep the lights on, school run squeezed between breakfast and lunch rushes, unpaid sick days when Jordan caught a cold, and evenings filled with secondhand math homework and dollar store dinners. She had dreams once, college, a career in social work maybe, but those dreams took a back seat the day she held Jordan in her arms and promised she'd give him everything she could. Bayfield Diner had been her job for nearly 6 years. It was the kind of place where time stood still, same red vinyl booths, same sticky counters, same chip pie plates. The only thing that had changed recently was management. The old owner, Mr. Grady, had retired and sold the place to a younger man from out of town. With him came a new assistant manager, Mason Clay. Mason was a man of rules, not relationships. Tall, clean-cut, always in a press button-up and polished shoes that looked out of place on the greasy floors. He didn't care about the locals or the history of the place. What he cared about was policy. No free refills unless ordered. No exceptions to the combo deals. No extras, unless logged in the POS system. No free meals, especially no free meals. Every action had to be documented. Every smile, if it cost the business anything, was considered theft in his eyes. Keisha tried to stay out of his way. He didn't like her much, she could tell. Maybe it was the way she took too long talking to the regulars, or the fact that she worked a little too slow when her feet ached from standing since dawn. Maybe it was that she didn't fear him the way others did. Mason liked fear. He wielded it like a ledger book, tallying up infractions he never spoke of, but always remembered. Still, Keisha kept her head down. She needed this job. Rent was due. Jordan's field trip deposit had to be paid by Friday. Her car was making that noise again. So she showed up, smiled through the pain in her knees, and gave the best of herself to people who often didn't notice. The regulars noticed, though. They knew her by name. They asked about Jordan. They left her extra tips when they could. In a town full of fences and old grudges, Keisha had built quiet bridges. And yet, beneath all that routine, beneath the clinking of plates, the scent of bacon grease and coffee grounds, there was something waiting. A moment. Something that would press against the dull rhythm of her life like a storm swelling beneath still waters. Keisha couldn't see it coming, but something was on its way. Something that would test every truth she believed about right and wrong. About power and pride. About the value of one small act of kindness. And it would all begin with a trembling hand, an old army jacket, and a simple plate of food. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It tapped steadily against the wide windows of Bayfield Diner, blurring the view of the street like tears sliding down a face. Keisha wiped down the counter with slow, practiced strokes, her mind drifting to Jordan's homework and the leftover soup waiting at home. She was tired, bone-tired, but she moved with the same quiet grace that carried her through every day. It was a rhythm of survival, of necessity. Then the bell above the door jingled. Keisha glanced up and saw him. An older man, maybe in his 70s, stepped inside. His army jacket was threadbare, shoulders hunched from the cold and years of burden. He walked with hesitation, as if unsure whether he was welcome, and settled into a booth by the window without removing his cap. His eyes scanned the menu, but he didn't reach for it. His hands, thin and shaking, folded on the table as he waited. Keisha approached with her usual smile, warm but not forced. "Afternoon, sir. Can I get you started with something?" He looked up, startled by her kindness. His voice was gravel-soft. "Just a glass of water, ma'am. That's all I need." Keisha paused. She'd seen this before, the silent hunger, the way someone tried to preserve their pride by ordering nothing at all. There was a story behind those eyes. Story she understood. Story she'd lived through in her own way. Without saying another word, she nodded and turned back toward the kitchen. Her heart was already made up. From her apron, she pulled out a few wrinkled bills, her tips from the morning shift, and handed them to the cook. "Plate me up the blue plate special. No onions," she said quietly, "and put it on mine." The cook raised a brow but didn't question it. Everyone at Bayfield knew Keisha's heart, even if the new management didn't. A few minutes later, Keisha returned with the hot plate. Meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes, and a buttered roll. She placed it gently in front of the man. His eyes widened in disbelief. "I didn't." She cut him off with a soft smile. "Everyone needs a warm meal on a day like this." His mouth opened, then closed. Emotion welled in his eyes, but he just nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and picked up his fork with trembling hands. That should have been the end of it, a simple act of kindness between two human beings. But Mason Clay saw everything. From behind the register, Mason's eyes narrowed. He stormed over, his dress shoes tapping sharply across the linoleum floor. His voice cut through the quiet diner like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" Keisha turned, startled. "I paid for it." "Mason," she replied evenly. "With my tips." "That's not the point," he snapped. "We have rules, Keisha. No freebies. No exceptions. It's not your place to give away food, no matter who it's for." Keisha stood her ground, but her voice softened. "He's a veteran, Mason. He wasn't asking for anything. I just did what felt right." "That's not your call to make," he hissed, his face reddening. "You violated policy." "That's theft." Gasps rippled from the nearby booths. The old man stared at his plate, mortified. Mason didn't lower his voice. He didn't wait to pull her aside. In front of the customers, the staff, and the man still holding his fork midair, Mason made his decision. "You're done here, Keisha. Get your things. You're fired." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, Keisha just stood there paralyzed. The apron around her waist felt suddenly too tight. Her hands went numb. Her dignity was stripped from her in real time, before an audience. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She unfastened her apron and folded it with care, even though her hands shook. The old veteran tried to speak. "Sir, please." She didn't. But Mason turned his back on both of them. And then, the door opened. 3 men stepped into the diner, the storm still clinging to their uniforms. Rainwater dripped from their boots, their fatigues damp with the scent of wet earth and gunpowder. The name patches on their chests told part of the story, but their bearing told the rest. Disciplined, tired but proud. Members of the local National Guard, regulars at Bayfield, and friends of Keisha's from quiet, respectful encounters across many shifts. They had walked in at the tail end of the confrontation, but it didn't take long to understand what had happened. The silence in the diner spoke volumes. The expressions on the faces around them, the shame on the veterans, the fury on Keisha's, and the smug pride on Mason's, told the story clearly. One of the soldiers, Sergeant Darius Mallory, stepped forward. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, and a voice like gravel smoothed by time. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He looked directly at Mason Clay and said only one thing. "Do you really think rules matter more than respect?" The room held its breath. Keisha froze mid-step, her folded apron clutched to her chest. Mason's lips parted as if to argue, but the words caught. He looked at the 3 men, each standing with perfect posture and silent disapproval. They didn't need to threaten him. Their presence alone was enough. They had risked their lives for this country, and they knew dignity when they saw it. From a booth in the corner, someone's phone screen glowed. A quiet click, a camera rolling, recording everything that just happened. No one moved to stop it. Keisha stood still, her eyes locked with Sergeant Mallory's. She had never felt more seen than in that moment. Not as an employee, not as a single mom, not as someone constantly overlooked, but as a person, a woman who had done something good and been punished for it. And now, the whole world was starting to watch. It started with a shaky video, no longer than a minute. Captured by a teenager in a corner booth, the footage was grainy but clear enough. The audio caught the moment when Sergeant Mallory asked the question that hung like thunder over the diner. Do you really think rules matter more than respect? That line, delivered with the weight of experience and a calm that cut deeper than anger, was followed by a long, pregnant silence. Keisha, in the background, stood clutching her apron. The veteran sat stunned, a fork still in his trembling hand. Mason Clay's face was clearly visible. Pale, lips tight, a man completely caught off guard by the unexpected judgment of 3 uniformed soldiers in a room full of quiet witnesses. The video was uploaded to social media within the hour, under the caption, "Waitress fired for buying a meal for a hungry vet. Look who stood up for her." And then came the hashtag Meals with Dignity. At first, it circled locally. Friends, family, a few high school students sharing it with dramatic emojis and disbelief. But the story didn't stay small. The rain that had soaked the sidewalks of Bayfield that afternoon now felt like a drumbeat, momentum gathering. Within 12 hours, the video had exploded across state lines. Veterans groups reposted it, many with heartfelt captions. "This woman gets it. This manager does not." Others added their own stories about times they'd been helped or forgotten and what it meant to be treated with basic decency. Facebook pages for nearby towns lit up with comments. Outraged, emotional, unified. On Twitter, the hashtag trended by morning. Local influencers and community organizers reshared it, calling for accountability, praising Keisha's quiet courage. The small southern town of Bayfield hadn't seen this kind of attention in years. By midday, local news stations arrived outside the diner. A reporter with curly hair and a determined look stood with a mic, giving the rundown in front of Bayfield Diner's faded awning. An act of kindness by a local waitress has sparked statewide attention and a wave of support for veterans and service workers alike. What started as a simple meal is now a growing movement. Inside the diner, everything had changed. The morning rush was thinner than usual. Regulars who once filled the booths sat this one out. The coffee urns gurgled to themselves while Mason Clay paced the back office. His name was now tied to a viral moment for all the wrong reasons. Employees whispered about whether he would last the week. No one envied him, especially not now, with community leaders posting statements online condemning what happened. A prominent city councilwoman wrote, "We cannot allow acts of kindness to be punished while cruelty hides behind policy. Keisha actions reflect the best of who we are." Another wrote, simply, "Keisha Hartley is the kind of person we need more of." Full stop. Back in her small apartment on the east side of town, Keisha wasn't on social media when the story first blew up. She was folding laundry and checking on her son's reading assignment. Her phone buzzed incessantly in the other room. It wasn't until a neighbor knocked, breathless, phone in hand, that she realized what had happened. "Keisha, you need to see this." Together, they watched the clip. Keisha winced at the part where Mason raised his voice. She didn't like attention. But then came Sergeant Mallory's voice. The way he stood up, not just for her, but for the principle behind what she did, made her throat tighten. She hadn't planned on becoming a symbol. She was just trying to do the right thing. The outpouring of support was almost overwhelming. Former customers sent messages. Some she barely remembered greeted her like an old friend. "We've always known you had a good heart." Messages came in from retired soldiers, people she'd never met, sharing stories of dignity and loss. Some offered prayers. Others offered job leads. All of them thanked her. But perhaps what moved Keisha most were the messages from other waitresses, dishwashers, and night shift workers across the country. "You stood up without yelling. That's hard to do. Thank you for reminding the world that we're not invisible. You made me proud to be in this job." Back at Bayfield Diner, Mason refused to speak to the press. But his silence only deepened the public's judgment. Keisha's name was on everyone's lips, spoken with admiration, her image quietly printed on hand-painted signs held up by folks who gathered outside the diner, not to cause trouble, but to stand in quiet solidarity. One cardboard sign said simply, "Kindness isn't theft." Another, written in looping cursive, read, "We stand with Keisha." In a matter of hours, Keisha had become more than a fired waitress. She had become a quiet emblem of human decency, someone who acted when it mattered, without thought of reward. And though the town didn't know it yet, the ripple she started was only just beginning to spread. The call came 2 mornings after the video hit its peak. Keisha was rinsing dishes at home, the water hot, her hands moving mechanically while her son scribbled quietly at the kitchen table. Her phone buzzed across the counter, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. "Ms. Hartley," a woman's voice said. "My name is Rachel Voss. I'm the director of Hearts Forward Foundation. I think you've heard of us. We help veterans and underserved families across the county." Keisha straightened. Her fingers paused above the dishwater. Rachel continued, gently but firmly. "We saw what happened, and more importantly, we saw how you handled it. With grace, integrity, and heart. We've got an opening, manager of our food pantry and kitchen outreach program. We'd like you to come by and talk about it." For a long moment, Keisha didn't respond. She looked at her son. He gave her a small smile, unsure but hopeful. Then, with a soft breath, she said yes. By the end of the week, Keisha was standing in the modest but bustling main hall of the Hearts Forward Center, wearing a soft navy polo and a name badge that read Program Manager, Keisha Hartley. The kitchen hummed behind her, pots boiling, voices laughing, spices hanging in the air like memories. It was different than the diner. Warmer, slower in some ways, but full of purpose. Here, she wasn't just taking orders or surviving double shifts. She was overseeing meals that went to those who couldn't afford them, organizing drives for winter coats, sitting with volunteers and veterans who needed more than food, who needed someone to listen. And she listened deeply. Keisha had found a place where kindness wasn't punished. It was the job description. Her first month flew by. She rebuilt the pantry inventory system, recruited 2 new volunteers, and created a weekly meal plan with options for diabetic veterans. Families started to recognize her face. Children waved when she walked down the hallway. The same warmth she had always carried, quiet, unshakable, now had room to grow. Meanwhile, across town, Bayfield Diner was unraveling. The booths that once overflowed during Sunday brunch now sat mostly empty. Locals who had grown up eating pancakes, there stopped coming. Even travelers who didn't know the full story would glance at the place and remember, "Oh, this is the diner from that video." Online reviews plummeted. Staff left. Some said nothing. Others simply scribbled notes on time cards and didn't return. The silence spoke for them. Mason Clay, who once enforced policies like commandments, was quietly dismissed after a closed-door meeting with the regional manager. No official statement. No farewell. Eventually, the diner changed hands. The help-wanted sign stayed up for weeks. The new owners painted the walls a lighter color, changed the menu, and tried to start fresh. But the town remembered. Justice didn't arrive in angry mobs or fiery protests. It arrived in choices, in silent boycotts, in regulars who simply never returned, in the economic echo of a moral failure. But Keisha wasn't focused on revenge. She didn't even mention Mason by name anymore. She had work to do, and people who needed her. In her 3rd month at Hearts Forward, Keisha organized a town-wide food drive. It was simple in concept, but powerful in reach. 1 meal, 1 neighbor. She sent letters to local churches, schools, and businesses. She stood in grocery stores on Saturdays, handing out flyers. The same community that had rallied around her story now rallied around her mission. Donations poured in, bags of canned goods, boxes of pasta, gently used winter coats, even handwritten notes of encouragement. Veterans who remembered her face from the diner came back to shake her hand. Some cried, some brought others. Word spread about the work she was doing. But more importantly, people felt it, not through speeches or slogans, but through meals, dignity, and quiet conversations. Keisha spoke at her first town hall that winter. Nervous at first, she took the microphone with steady hands. "I'm not here because of a viral video," she said. "I'm here because we've got people who are hungry, tired, and invisible, and that's something we can fix. Not all at once, but meal by meal, story by story." Afterward, young women, waitresses, mothers, students lined up to speak with her. They asked for advice. They told her their own stories of being ignored, dismissed, fired for standing up for themselves. Keisha didn't pretend to have all the answers, but she listened. And when they left standing a little straighter. She began mentoring 2 single mothers in the program's job readiness course. They came from similar pasts: long shifts, skipped meals, unpaid bills, and unspoken resilience. With Keisha's guidance, they found not just work, but purpose. Her journey was no longer about one act of kindness. It was about what came after, the quiet, daily work of building something better. She kept her old apron from Bayfield Diner, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder that even in places where kindness is punished, it still has power. That a single moment, born of instinct and compassion, can ripple out into a movement of change. And though she never sought the spotlight, the community kept looking to her, not just as the woman who stood up, but as the woman who built forward. Keisha Hartley had turned injustice into transformation. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.